Three women walk into Glasgow's Barrowland Ballroom, all married, all brunettes, all leave with a charming man named John, who quotes the Bible.
And none survive the night.
February 1968 to October 1969. 3 murders. One witness who rode in a taxi with the killer for 20 minutes.
And then he vanished.
56 years later, still nobody arrested.
It is, without a doubt, the most haunting unsolved case in Scottish history. And the failure to capture Bible John, it didn't just frustrate the police. It really fundamentally changed how Glasgow saw its own safety.
And its own police force.
Absolutely.
Exactly, because what we're looking at here is a monumental failure. And that's despite a huge effort.
Unprecedented, really.
Over 100 detectives interviewed 7,000 people. They had a composite sketch, based on that single vital piece of witness testimony.
The most important in Scottish criminalist history, you could argue.
They had dental records pointing to a very distinctive overlapping tooth, thanks to a bite mark he left. A witness who heard him condemn adultery and, quote, scripture.
And all of that specific, usable information just makes his vanishing act all the more.
Well, infuriating. The whole mythology around Bible John grew because the investigation just seemed to hit a brick wall.
Which shifted the focus, didn't it? Away from the crime itself and onto the institutional failures that may have let him get away.
And that's really the core of what we're looking at today. It's not just the murders, it's what happened after.
In 2022, a BBC podcast, Bible John, Creation of a Serial Killer, it unearthed something truly shocking.
Right.
Allegations that police may have actively covered up the killer's identity to protect a relative of a senior officer.
And the speculation, it just hasn't stopped. In 2024, a new book came out naming a new suspect using modern genealogy.
Sean Templeton?
John Templeton, a man who was interviewed by police back in the day, whose own colleagues apparently nicknamed him Bible John, and who died in 2015 without ever being charged.
And the name Templeton matches one of the aliases heard in the taxi.
It does. They know who he might be. They have DNA. They have a familial match. So why won't they tell us about Scotland's Zodiac killer?
Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
Follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
Today, we are investigating the horrific violence inflicted on 3 mothers and the persistent shadows of failure and corruption that still linger 56 years later.
To really understand the pattern, we have to start by honoring the women. They weren't just statistics. They were wives, mothers, and they were all linked by one place.
The Barrowland Ballroom.
Yeah.
And the setting is so crucial here.
It's an institution in Glasgow, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially it's over 25's night. For a lot of people, and especially for married women in that era, it was a real escape from the rigid social norms of 1960s Glasgow.
The first victim was Patricia Docker. This was back in February 1968.
She was only 25, an auxiliary nurse, and a mom to a young son. She was estranged from her husband, Alex Docker, who was in the RAF and stationed away from home.
And like a lot of women, she didn't tell her parents where she was really going that night.
No. She told them she was heading to a different venue, the Majestic. It was just easier, less judgment. She was dressed for a night out, a yellow mini dress, a duffel coat.
But she never came home.
No. Her body was found the next morning in a lane very close to her home in Langside. She'd been severely beaten, she was naked, and she was strangled with some kind of ligature. Her handbag was gone.
And the investigation stumbled right out of the gate.
It did. Because she'd lied about where she was going, police wasted 3 critical days looking at the Majestic.
And all that time, the trail at the Barrowland went completely
cold. 3 days in a murder hunt is an eternity.
It's everything.
Yeah.
And the post-mortem turned up a detail that, at the time, seemed secondary.
Right. The medical examiner noted that Patricia Docker was menstruating when she died. In 1968, that was just, cataloged. It wasn't prioritized. The police saw it as a one-off, probably a sexual assault that went wrong.
So they move on, and 18 months pass.
That gap is so important. It suggests, a chilling patience, or maybe he was away or even locked up for something else. But in August 1969, he came back.
And he reinforces a pattern so specific it just screams serial killer.
The next victim was Jemima MacDonald. She was 32, a mother of 3 young kids, and recently separated. She'd actually been to the Barrowland 3 nights in a row that week.
And eyewitnesses saw her with a man.
A man who called himself John. And the description was almost identical to the man seen with Patricia Docker. tall, late 20s, slim, well-dressed, reddish hair, Glaswegian accent.
He was even heard using sort of formal, almost religious language.
Yeah.
Jemima's body was found in a tenement close, again, near her home. Fiercely assaulted, strangled, handbag missing. It was a mirror image of the first murder.
But this time, the killer left his signature. A sanitary towel was found deliberately placed beneath her body.
And that's when the police knew.
That's when they had an undeniable pattern. Both women met a John at the Barrowland. Both mothers. Both strangled near home. Both had their handbags stolen.
And crucially, both were menstruating.
With the sanitary item now being emphasized, this wasn't a coincidence anymore.
It pointed to a horrifying motive, didn't it? That the killer's rage was somehow triggered by the menstrual cycle.
A deep-seated revulsion, maybe? Or part of some kind of ritual? It's a very niche, very specific pathology that immediately set this killer apart.
It's the 18-month pause that unnerves you. To just stop and then come back and repeat the exact meticulous pattern. That had to change everything for the police.
Oh, absolutely. They knew they were hunting a monster, a patient, methodical predator. But he only gave them 2 months to prepare before he struck again, for the final time.
And this third murder is the one that gave the police everything they needed to catch him. And yet, it's the one that cemented the failure.
October 31st, 1969, Halloween night. Helen Puttock, 29, a married mother of 2, goes to the Barrowland.
But she doesn't go alone. She makes a choice that really should have saved her life. She went with her sister, Jean Langford.
And that decision would come to define the entire investigation. Helen's husband, George, actually stayed home with the kids. He was worried, about the Barrowland killer. But Helen thought there was safety in numbers.
So at the ballroom, Helen and Jean meet 2 men, both named John.
Right. One of them leaves early to catch his bus. The other one, the killer, joins the sisters in a taxi for the ride home.
And that 20-minute taxi ride is arguably the most valuable piece of witness testimony in any unsolved Scottish case.
It gave him a face, a voice, and a chilling look inside his mind.
Helen was dropped off first. Jean continued on. Shortly after, Helen's body was found. Raped, beaten, and strangled with her own stockings.
The brutality was the same, but this time he left a bite mark on her wrist. A very clear one. And like with Jemima, a sanitary towel was found placed under her arm.
And Jean Langford gave police a direct transcript of that conversation in the taxi. It was filled with this disturbing religious judgment.
He was very disapproving of married women being at the Barrowland. As soon as they admitted they were married, his whole tone changed.
He said, "You know what happens to the adulterous wife? She gets stoned to death."
Chilling. He's quoting Old Testament scripture right there in the taxi. That's what earned him the nickname from the press.
Bible John.
Bible John.
But beyond the quotes, Jean provided so many clues. He gave a name, or a few names, didn't he?
Yeah, she said it was slurred, but it sounded like John Emerson, John Sempleson, or, and this is critical for later, John Templeton.
He was also really evasive.
Very. He claimed to be an only child, but then he immediately contradicted himself, mentioned his sister getting locked out for being drunk.
A slip-up.
A tiny one, and he just changed the subject right away. Started talking about foster homes, children's homes. It suggested a difficult, maybe fragmented past.
And he knew the area so well. The bus fares, the train times. He was local.
Definitely. He recognized the high-rise flats on Kingsway. He was rooted in that part of Glasgow.
So using all this, the police create a composite sketch.
And this was a huge deal for Scotland. A detailed color portrait done by an artist from the Glasgow School of Art. They put it everywhere.
The description was so clear. 5'10" to 6 foot, slim, light reddish hair, blue-gray eyes, very smart, modern suit.
This sketch was supposed to be the end of the manhunt.
Instead, it was just the beginning of the chaos. Jean Langford gave them everything. The face, the accent, the name, the religious monologue, a perfect description. So why did the biggest manhunt in Scottish history fail so completely?
That is the question, isn't it? It wasn't a lack of information, it was too much information, combined with the limits of policing at the time.
And as we'll see, some really deep-seated biases.
The portrait went public, and the phone started ringing off the hook. Over 4,000 people called in, claiming they knew the man.
Which just swamps the investigation.
Exactly. It diluted the real leads with thousands of false ones. But you have to appreciate the scale of the effort. Over 100 detectives, 50,000 statements taken, 5,000 suspects questioned.
They did everything they could think of, right? Undercover cops at the Barrowland.
Yep. Dance duty. Male and female officers sent in to try and bait the killer. It didn't work. The public was so scared. Attendance at the dance halls just plummeted. So they shut it down.
And they chased every little detail from that taxi ride.
Every single one. They called over 400 golf courses in Scotland asking about a cousin who scored a hole-in-one.
That's incredible. And the tooth.
They asked dentists all over the country to check their records for a patient with that specific overlapping front tooth from the bite mark.
They even looked at the military, didn't they?
Globally. Army, Navy, Air Force bases all over the world got that sketch because he had that neat short haircut, wore a watch. They thought he might be a serviceman, but nothing.
And after Helen Puttock's murder, he just vanished.
Gone. Police figured he'd either died, moved away, or maybe been put in a psychiatric hospital. The trail went ice cold.
So they brought in profilers.
They did. The profile from 1970 is fascinating. It described him as a sexually compulsive loner, but highly intelligent, meticulous, well-groomed, outwardly shy, the kind of man a mother would approve of.
The wolf in sheep's clothing.
Precisely. It suggested he had all these traits you see in organized sex killers. Vanity, obsessive tidiness, and a really strong, almost puritanical dislike of things like drinking or swearing.
And they had a theory he lived with his mother.
Yeah, that he was her sweet little boy, which masked this deep hatred of women that would just erupt into violence.
Which brings us to maybe the most painful part of this original investigation. The misogyny. The victim blaming.
It's right there in the police records. The focus was so heavily on the fact that these were married women out at a dance hall.
They were labeled in the notes as promiscuous.
Yes, or that they drank too much or shouldn't have been out. And this wasn't just some hidden bias. It was stated openly. The head of the inquiry, Detective Superintendent Joe Beatty, allegedly said his team wasn't motivated to solve Helen Puttock's murder because of what she was.
That's just poison to an investigation. If you're blaming the victim, you're not properly looking for the killer.
And you see it in how they relentlessly focused on the husbands. Alex Docker, Patricia's husband, was an early suspect. Jemima MacDonald's estranged husband was questioned over and over.
And Helen Puttock's husband, George, had to live under that cloud for decades.
For decades. Until 1996, when his DNA finally cleared him, this obsession with the domestic angle, even when all the evidence pointed to a random ritualistic predator, it shows a profound failure to follow the facts.
And there were other missed opportunities, weren't there? Like the woman who claimed she'd been attacked by him.
Hannah Martin. She came forward to say she was raped by Bible John after meeting him at the Barrowland in April 1969, right between the second and third murders. She said she had his child.
A direct genetic link to the killer.
A direct link. But because she came forward years later, the police were skeptical. The opportunity was never really seized.
It's like every time they had a golden chance, it just slipped through their fingers because of these institutional failures.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Share this episode with others who might have information about this case, and help. Also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating.
For almost 30 years, Bible John was a ghost. Then, in the 21st century, a real-life monster was caught, and his profile was so eerily similar that everyone thought, this is him.
Peter Tobin, a convicted serial killer and rapist. When he was finally caught, the sheer brutality of his known crimes made everyone suspect he must have started killing much, much earlier.
And the overlaps with the Bible John case were just uncanny.
They were profound. Tobin lived in Glasgow in the late 60s. He met his first wife at the Barrowland Ballroom in 1968. He was known to be a fanatical Catholic with very strong puritanical views.
And here's the detail that sealed it for so many people.
His ex-wives all said he was driven to extreme violence specifically linked to their menstrual cycles. He had a pathological rage about it, the exact motive they suspected for Bible John.
One criminologist, David Wilson, staked his entire professional reputation on it.
He did. He pointed to these tiny, specific conversational overlaps, things Bible John said in the taxi and things Tobin was known to have said later.
Like not drinking on New Year's Eve.
Right. And talking about a cousin who scored a hole-in-one in golf. These tiny, weirdly specific details that suggested the same man was just recycling his old stories.
So the police launched Operation Anagram in 2006, basically a massive cold case review just focused on Tobin's life.
And they got a huge lead. A woman called and said she'd been raped by Tobin after meeting him at the Barrowland in 1968, right after Patricia Docker was murdered. All the pieces just seemed to be falling into place.
But this is where hard evidence has to intervene.
And it did. The first big problem was the timeline. Operation Anagram established that Tobin moved from Glasgow to Brighton with his fiancée before the second murder.
Before Jemima MacDonald was killed in August 69.
Exactly. They got married in Brighton on August 6th. Jemima was murdered 10 days later. Tobin's wife swore he was with her in Brighton on their honeymoon during the later murders. It just didn't fit.
His MO was different too, wasn't it?
Very different. Bible John displayed his victims publicly. Tobin meticulously buried his victims, hid them away.
But the final nail in the coffin for the Tobin theory was DNA.
The definitive line. They still had the semen stain from Helen Puttock's tights, the killer's DNA. They tested it against Peter Tobin's profile.
Yeah.
No match. It was absolute. The DNA was not from Peter Tobin. The police officially, permanently eliminated him as a suspect.
And even Jean Langford, when she was shown his picture years later, said no.
Emphatically, that's not the man.
So the DNA draws a line through Tobin's name. But it leaves us with an even darker truth.
The man who killed those women is still out there, or died free, and his genetic signature has been sitting in police possession since the 1990s.
Which brings us to the most contentious part of this whole story, the allegations of a police cover-up.
The modern story of this case really hinges on the failure to investigate leads that pointed, well, inwards. It all centers on a man named John Irvine McGinnis.
He was a former Scots Guardsman, and he became a major suspect during a cold case review in the 90s.
A very strong suspect. He had a striking resemblance to the composite sketch, and his military background fit the neat, formal appearance of the killer.
McGinnis died in 1980, suicide.
Yes, and the way he did it, by severing his brachial artery, was considered unusual. Some psychiatrists felt it pointed to a very controlled, maybe even psychopathic personality.
So with all this circumstantial evidence, police exhumed his body in 1996, hoping for a DNA match.
And the press went wild. They were sure this was him. But the exhumation was a complete disaster for the authorities.
Why?
First, the DNA testing back then was inconclusive. The samples were too degraded. But more importantly, they discovered McGinnis wore full dentures.
Which completely contradicts the bite mark.
Completely. The bite mark on Helen Puttock's wrist showed a very specific, overlapping natural tooth. Dentures don't do that.
And Jean Langford had never identified him.
She hadn't. She insisted in 1996, again, that McGinnis was not the man. But it wasn't until around 2005, with better technology, that they could definitively say his DNA was not a match. He was officially cleared.
But that's not the end of the McGinnis story, is it?
Not even close. The 2022 BBC podcast blew this all wide open with allegations of a shocking conspiracy by senior police officers back in 1969.
And it all comes down to McGinnis's family.
He was the cousin of a police officer on the case, and he was directly related to the head of the inquiry, Detective Superintendent Joe Beatty.
And the review team in the 90s found notes showing that senior officers visited McGinnis just days after Helen Puttock's murder.
But here's the critical point. Despite the visit, despite the resemblance, McGinnis was never put in an ID parade for Jean Langford to see.
They deliberately kept him away from their only eyewitness.
That's the allegation, that it was a calculated decision to shield a relative of a senior officer.
The review team in the 90s found all this.
They found all of it. They found the misogynistic notes about the victims, they found the alleged comments from Beatty, and they discovered that a key piece of evidence, a business card found at the scene, had gone missing from the records.
It paints a picture of a deeply flawed, maybe even corrupt investigation.
And yet, despite the 90s team uncovering all this, the Lord Advocate Scotland's chief prosecutor shut the Bible John case down in 1996.
Which just fueled the suspicion that the institution was protecting itself.
Exactly.
And now, in 2024, we have this new book pointing the finger at John Templeton, the name from the taxi.
A man who lived in the area, who fit the look, and was known to the police. The book claims he was interviewed back then, and that his own work colleagues called him Bible John because he was always quoting scripture.
So if they interviewed a man named John Templeton, who looked right and was known for quoting the Bible, why wasn't he pursued?
It suggests that with the focus on the husbands and the potential protection of McGinnis, other very credible leads like Templeton were just tragically lost in the noise.
And the final, most infuriating piece of this puzzle is the DNA.
In 2004, the police made a huge announcement.
They did. They announced they'd found an 80% genetic match between the killer's DNA and a sample taken from a minor crime a couple of years earlier.
A familial DNA match.
Which is a massive lead. An 80% match means the killer is almost certainly a close relative of the person on that database. A father, a brother, a first cousin. It gives you the family tree.
A lead like that should have cracked the case wide open.
It should have.
So why didn't it? Why have we heard nothing more about it? The police know the family line. Why the silence? It raises that specter of institutional protection again. What if that familial match pointed back to the family of the man they allegedly protected in 1969, or the family of this new suspect, Templeton? It creates a very serious dilemma for the police.
The victims' families deserve the truth, not just about the killer, but about the institution that was supposed to find him. Did police corruption in the 60s let Bible John walk free? And are those same failures still preventing the release of that crucial genetic truth today?
The whole case is this haunting mix of the specific and the systemic. You have that incredible 20-minute conversation, the killer's terrifying religious fervor, and then the institutional failure that has allowed this to go unsolved for 56 years.
And the DNA evidence, which cleared Tobin and McInnes, still holds the key. That familial match from 2004 is the last, best hope for justice for Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puttock.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating.
If the killer's identity was covered up to protect a relative of a senior officer in 1969, and a familial DNA match that pointed to a relative was made public in 2004, we are left with a chilling thought. Is protecting the perpetrator or the institution that failed to find him a higher priority for the authorities than delivering justice for 3 murdered mothers?
We urge anyone with information about the man known as Bible John, or any details related to the victims, Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, or Helen Puttock, to contact Police Scotland. The case remains officially open, and after 56 years, the families deserve the truth.